Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Anise Fisher, and I am so excited that you have decided to spend your Tuesday afternoon post-Memorial Day with Developing Capacity Coaching. We are here to talk to you today about anchors for holding steady. So this is the third session in our lineup for Leading for Anti-Racism and Equity, and I am equally excited because I get to do this webinar with two people who are very near and dear to me, who I've known for quite some time. Anthony Curtis Jr., who is a coach affiliate with Developing Capacity Coaching, but he is also the senior manager for volunteer programs and organizational culture at NIFTY, the Network for Entrepreneurship. And I also have here Dr. C.G. Ann Heiser, who is our Senior Impact Officer at Developing Capacity Coaching. She heads up all of our assessment, evaluation, our marketing and communications. So at different times, you will see the three of us engaging in this workshop. In the chat box, if you want to go ahead and just write where you're from and what do you hope to learn. Let's see what we have here. We have Chicago, we have Boston, hello, hello. We have folks from Arizona. We have folks hoping to learn about their leadership approach to holding steady. What does it mean to lead for DEI? How do you lead for anti-racism in a divided workplace? These are all great topics that we will be sure to cover as much as we can during this session. And we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can actually end on time. So I will come front and center. Anthony and CJ will mute their screens, and we will go ahead and get going. So we always like to start our sessions with a land and labor acknowledgement to acknowledge two things. One, our indigenous brothers and sisters that occupied this land before us. These are the lands that we sit on in the city of Chicago. And while we know that these land and labor acknowledgements do not restore lands back to our indigenous brothers and sisters, it is us as a company Developing Capacity Coaching saying that we stand in solidarity for true reparations and for true restoration of all of the financial loss that has happened as a result of removing indigenous folks from their lands. And we also give a labor acknowledgement to acknowledge our enslaved Africans who were brought here to this country, who their work has formed the backbone of the financial institutions, has formed the backbone of so much of what we benefit in this country, and we never get a chance to say thank you for your labor. And so we always like to take a moment to just center and bring them into the space. And so what we're going to do is to invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to lead us through 3 deep breaths to center our soul and to bring them into the space. So if you want to take a deep breath in, exhale. Whatever you're doing, stop what you're doing and breathe with us so you can come into the space. Take a deep breath in. Exhale. We're going to take one more breath in. And we're going to exhale. Okay. Thank you for just taking a moment to center yourself. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our session outcomes. During our time today in these high impact 45 minutes, Anthony and I are going to talk to you about the importance of holding steady and anchoring yourself, not just when you want to have peace and joy, but when you're winning and advancing equity, when people are resisting you, and then how do you maintain momentum during the change process. We will introduce you to our framework for holding steady, KIA, which stands for Know Your Authority, Identify the Type, and Anchor Yourself. And with that, we believe that you're going to be able to leave here with some sort of plan on how you can integrate this into your practice. You will also receive from us at the end of the session a handout that lays out this KIA framework that you can print and share with your colleagues. I'm going to briefly talk to you a little bit about our mission and vision, because we think it's important for you to understand that, because that's how we anchor ourselves in this work. Our mission at the baseline level at developing capacity is to coach people to trust themselves, to lead for equity and justice at work, in their families, and within their communities. Our vision for the world is that we will get to a place where every day people will wake up and say, how can I use my power and my choice to create environments where everyone can have full and equal opportunity to benefit from the resources within the organization, within our community, and our world. Our nice graphic over here represents our core values. So everything that we do in developing capacity is grounded in equity, it's grounded in love, it's grounded in healing, and it's grounded in justice. That's our foundation. And whenever you partner with us, and you will experience that in the session today, you will experience some capacity building where we're giving you some skills, hard skills that you can use to advance equity. You'll experience the coaching part of us where we are trying to encourage you to see yourself and all the power that you possess to lead for equity. And then we will be empowering you with data informed. How do you make decisions based on data and not just out of nowhere? And then you will always leave with the blueprint. That's us staking, our flag in the ground. You will leave here with the KIA framework, which is an example of our blueprint. So these are the three things that you will always experience when you are interacting with developing capacity. Next, I want to bring in Anthony, who's going to talk to you a little bit about how we want you to anchor yourself as you engage in our session.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. So as we talk about this work today, we're going to talk about advancing equity and holding steady, because we know this work is hard. Sometimes it is challenging in the midst of fighting for a just world so that everyone has equal access to all the resources in the organization, in the school, wherever it may be. That's not easy work. So we're going to talk about honoring our shared humanity, how we can focus on advancing equity and justice, as Dr. Fisher talked about, through coaching, healing, and through love. It all starts with love, right? Plus, in the midst of that, acknowledging your authority, how you understand your power and choice to stay in it even when it's tough, despite the context, to really make sure you are strong in the midst of the wins, in the midst of creating momentum for yourself or your team, in the midst of resistance, because sometimes there is resistance, but also talking about how in the midst of that, you still gather and gain joy and peace in the midst of this equity work.
So I'm going to give you a quick definition about what do we mean with racial equity. This is our offering. This is how we define it at Developing Capacity. And we want to define it up front because we think it's important for you to understand when Anthony and I talk about racial equity, or when Dr. Heiser comes on later and talks about racial equity, this is how we look at it. Racial equity is that every member in your organization, regardless of their race and ethnicity, they have full and equal access to participate in and benefit from the resources in your organization. When you have racial disparities, when you have an all-white leadership team, when you have parts of your organization where there are people of color who are not fully belonging, you have a racial equity challenge. Why is that? It's because racial equity involves the process of eliminating any identity-based disparities, which means that if you have a situation where people are not fully engaged in your organization and it is a color line, you need to actively disrupt for diversity. So you need to actively pursue to eliminate the racial disparities, and you need to dismantle for inclusion. What do we mean by that? We mean you have to directly address any inequities that are marginalizing people of color so that everyone feels like they belong. It does not mean that white people do not matter. It means that we are addressing any inequities that are marginalizing and pushing people of color to the edges. And we do this one-on-one, at the individual level, and also structurally. Ultimately, we want you to remember that when you are trying to achieve racial equity, you have to rebuild with stakeholders. You have to rebuild with people that are closest to the work. You have to engage people of color in the work. We have to engage our white brethren in this work, because our goal is that everybody will have full and equal. And it's not just access to something. We don't want people to just say, I'm in the organization. No, it's beyond access. They have to, one, have access. Two, they have to be able to participate at all different levels. And three, be able to benefit from all of the resources within the organization, both for your staff and the people that might be collaborating with you. And the last thing I'll say here is that racial equity is sustained by consistency and accountability. It means that racial justice and racial equity doesn't just happen. You have to invite it to the table. And Anthony and I are going to talk to you about how do you remain consistent today. Our framework is guided by Kia, and hopefully you should remember this, because if you think about the Kia car, you got a framework, but it's going to be focused on this concept of knowing, identifying, and anchoring. When we talk about anchors for holding steady, we don't think you just need to hold steady when you need a relaxing break or when you need to have peace. You need to hold people steady across 4 different contexts. Winning, when you're advancing the equity agenda, when people are resisting you, when you want to maintain momentum, and when you want to have joy and peace. And we're always going to talk about what's your authority in that context. You have to know, where do you sit? And then what is the anchor? And the last thing I'll say here is, I know some of you might be taking notes and trying to capture everything that I'm saying or everything that Anthony is going to say. I'm going to invite you to do what my mother used to say to me, is look, listen, and learn. And I want to encourage you to just look at the slides, listen, and then whatever you feel led to write that down versus trying to write down every single thing, because Dr. Heiser is going to give you a handout that has what you can do in each one of these 4 types of anchors. So just give your hands a little bit of a break, or your fingertips a little bit of a break. So the first topic I want to talk to you about is the importance of anchoring when you're winning. And here's the thing, oftentimes when we are winning, which means that we have made an advancement in equity, which means that something that we said we wanted to do has happened. So I'm going to give you an example. You're in organization X, and you have publicly shared with your entire organization, we're going to create an equity training program where everyone in the organization is going to go through and be trained on the basics of equity, and then how do we create a fair and just environment. You just launched your first program. That's an equity win. You've actually moved the needle. That's the type there. Now, I want to back you up, and I want you to think about, where do you sit with this equity win? So as we go through these different examples, we want you to think about this from your lens, not from what your manager needs to do, but you as you in the locus of control, you. And we want you to think about, what's your authority? Are you the manager? Are you the colleague in this particular context? And then you want to be thinking about, what are the boundaries? What are the boundaries of your authority? Okay, so I'm gonna try on this for an example. I'm gonna say I am the manager, and I have just given authorization for my team to go through an equity training program. So that's my authority as the manager. I've given authorization for us to go through an equity training program, and we just did our very first session, right? So that's the win. We just did our first session. The next thing is, you want to anchor your team so they stay excited about you winning for equity. How many times have we launched an equity initiative and we don't even celebrate or talk about it? We just keep going. Just put your hand up in the chat box if you can relate to me. So one way that you need to anchor people when you're winning is to publicly celebrate the gain that you just made, and not in a performative manner, but to publicly celebrate it and said, we set out 6 months ago to create an equity training program, and we've just had our first session. Thank you to the team members who put it together. And now you want to paint the possibility of continued equity success. We're looking forward to continuing this work in sections 2, 3, and 4, as well as addressing our policies in this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ways. That is a way that you anchor the team. We've done it. Okay, public talked about it. You can send an email, you can send a newsletter, you can talk about it at your next all-team meeting. And then you want to paint the possibility of continued equity success, that we're going to keep going here. And here's why you want to do this. Because sometimes when you have that first equity win, here comes the knocks of resistance. Here comes the knocks of people basically creating barriers to your equity work, because maybe some folks weren't excited about the organization embarking on this equity journey. So we're going to take that same example. We've launched the equity training program, but now we're starting to get resistance. People are starting to flat out resist this work. So I'm going to go back to my authority. What's my authority? I am the manager in this situation. What's in my locus of control? I can have a meeting with my team. I have influence and impact over requiring people to come to the session. What else is in my locus of control? I can open my ears up and listen to why people are resisting, right? But my authority, that's your job description, number one. And number two, your authority is, in this particular context, for me, I am the quote unquote manager. That's my authority. I have some power. You are never without power, right? So when people start to resist, there are a couple ways that you need to anchor yourself. You need to be able to name the barriers, understanding what people feel like they're losing, and then you're going to have to clarify values and recenter the work. So I'm going to walk you through how do you anchor yourself, because we've all seen this before. People are excited in the beginning, and then all of a sudden now there's conversations that's happening about people saying, why are we doing this equity work? White people are feeling isolated. People of color are tired. I'm sure you all have probably heard this before. So the way you anchor yourself in resistance is you need to think about what is the type of barrier that you're experiencing. What does the resistance look like? And there are multiple ways, but we're going to name three. The first one is personalizing. Sometimes people resist you by personalizing attacks. Why is Anise doing this? She doesn't have authority to do this. She's not competent to do this. We all have seen it before. This is when people start doing personal attacks against you. The second way that people resist you is that they create distractions. So we're supposed to be focusing on racial equity. And then someone says, well, we can't talk about racial equity without talking about LGBTQIA, or we must talk about the experiences of folks with ability challenges. And here's what I want to say to you, that we can still talk about all of that, but it's a distraction when we're talking about race, right? We're leaning into the conversation of race. We should still have all of those other conversations. And yes, there's intersectionality, but that's an example of a distraction. People are trying to move away from the actual issue that we should be focusing in on. The other ways distractions happening is that sometimes when you're in a meeting and you're leading a session, people might try to giggle or crack jokes or, basically disrupt the environment. And the third type of barrier we sometimes see are equity detours. Equity detours is based on the work of Paul Gorski. He talks about this is when people don't want to deal with racial equity. So they'll do things like, instead of talking about the experiences of our Latino brothers and sisters, we should just have a Cinco de Mayo celebration. We should celebrate Latino Heritage Month, and that's it. They only want to do the celebratory events. Or we shouldn't talk about race because people aren't ready to talk about race. That's a detour. And that detour is an example of a resistance, okay? But you need to ask yourself, why do people resist? People resist, in the words of Ron Heifetz, people don't resist change, they resist loss. So we need to be able to understand when people are resisting us, two things. One, what do they feel like they're losing? Are we asking people to feel like they're losing autonomy, responsibility? Do they feel like they're losing some level of authority? So if we create an equity training program, right, our human resources department may feel like they're losing a little bit of their authority because they are the training and development arm of the organization. And now the equity committee is in charge of training and development. How does this happen? And so we've seen it before. We've seen it before where people will begin to infight. What you want to do is to name, what do people feel like they're losing? And you can ask people, if you feel people resisting in the personalizing, distraction, equity detours, you can actually ask people, okay, what's your challenge here? What's making you uncomfortable? That's going to let you know what they're losing, right? And then you want to understand who they're loyal to. And loyalties are important because sometimes people resist you, not because they don't want to do the equity work, but it's because there's 6 friends in the company or there's 6 friends in the organization have an issue with the person who's leading the equity work. And so now everybody's against it. And so loyalties is anybody that people don't want to disappoint. And the reason why you need to understand the loyalties and the losses is because, one, we have to acknowledge it. And part of why equity work fails and we feel like we don't have an anchor is because people want to dance over the issues, right? You need to surface what's actually happening. What do people feel like they're losing? And then you want to pivot by clarifying your shared values and building from there. What do I mean by that? If now people are starting to resist this equity training program that a second ago everybody seemed to love, I will then, if I'm the manager using my authority, I'm going to ground them in, number one, here are the shared values of our organization. Here's what we set out to do. Here's the commitment that we said that we were going to focus in on in this year. And this work is focused in on supporting those goals. We said we wanted to be more inclusive. We said we wanted to be more just. We said we wanted to be anti-racist. Everything that we're doing is in service of that. Oh, John, who might be your resistor, John, I remember you saying to me that you just want everybody to have a fair experience and you just want everybody to be included. Well, that is what this equity initiative is doing. It's actually ensuring that everyone is included. So you begin to pull in from your people who are resisting all the things that they've said should be included, meaning that I want to make sure that everyone has a fair shot here. It's not us against them, right? You want to clarify the shared values and recenter on the work. Don't get caught up in the personalizing. Don't get caught up in the distractions. Don't get caught up in the detours. You keep recentering people on the work. You keep recentering people on the shared values of the organization. You keep recentering people on the commitments that you have made. I know that was a lot. And the last anchor that we're going to talk to you about, and then I'm going to toss it over to Anthony, is how do you keep the momentum going? So, right, you get started with the win, woo, yay! And then the resistance comes and try to knock you off, but not anymore, because now you have an anchor. Now you know I'm going to name what the resistance is. I'm going to identify what people are losing because I'm going to talk to people and listen to them to hear what's going on. And then I'm going to clarify the shared values that we have made as an organization or whatever norms we have created as a team, right? Now you have to get the momentum going again. You want to keep momentum. I'm doing all of this from my role as, the manager, but you could also do all of this from your role as a team member. For example, for keeping the momentum going, I'm a member of a team and I know that we have started to make some momentum, right? Momentum means people are steadily moving ahead with advancing the equity agenda. We have now had 3 equity training sessions and we've started to revisit our job descriptions in the organization to include diversity and inclusion metrics. We've got some momentum, baby. We are moving. Now what you need to do is you have to anchor people in the momentum. You have to pause and identify all the gains that you've made. All the gains, the trainings that you've listened to people who had some challenges and you started to support them on their journey to getting on board. You want to talk about how you're starting to shift your policies and processes. And then you want to identify what it's going to take to get to the next equity milestone. You want to be able to identify and say, okay, here's what it's going to take for us to get to the next part of our equity journey, which is for us to have all of our policies and processes fully embed equity and inclusion. That's going to take us another 6 months to a year to get there. Here's what it's going to take. We're going to need each of you to show up with a positive attitude and support this work. Or if you have challenges, go and talk to us and let us engage in a back and forth conversation. We're going to need each of you to have an abundance mentality, not a scarcity one, and a mentality to see that there is a possibility for us to create an environment where all people can belong and all people can feel included. And we're going to keep engaging you in the process of building inclusion. It's going to take some of us being willing to change a little bit. The way we get promoted and the way people, get raises are going to change in the organization. I know that's going to frustrate people, but that's where we have to go so that we can truly make sure that everyone has full and equal access, so that we can make sure that we honor our values. Oftentimes, people don't say that. They don't move people along the equity agenda. We don't tell people what is it going to take to get to the end, and we don't come in and build on our momentum. And so people get tired and they get frustrated and they get challenged and they throw their hands up and you go back to the resistance. So here's why we wanted to show you that it's important to have a trajectory. Anchor yourself in the win. Anchor yourself when people are resistant, recentering folks on the work, dealing with the real issues, and anchor yourself when that momentum is moving and flowing so that people have the stamina to keep going. I'm going to turn it over to Anthony, and he's going to spend roughly about 7 minutes or so talking to you about how do you have joy and peace in all of this? Because I'm sure I just raised half the people's blood pressures on here, and how do you keep steady with this? So he's going to talk to you about how do you maintain your joy and your peace in the midst of all this.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher. And Dr. Fisher, I love what you said. In the midst of this work, it is a journey, right? This is a continuous thing, and it's a collaborative process. So first of all, in the midst of this, you have to figure out how in the midst of this, your power and choice you create and find those anchors for joy and peace for yourself. So one thing, and I have to give credit, I'm in a fellowship program, part of the New Sector Alliance. And in this fellowship program, I learned so much about leadership and longevity and wellness. And some tips and things we talked about there is little things like this: adding more movement in your life. That actually impacts your brain. There's research behind that actually shows movement in the midst of sitting all day, whether it be walking, daily routines, building something, right? Gardening on the nice, now that it's nice weather across the country, those kind of things that impacts your brain, that gives you that joy, that peace, even taking the stairs, little things like that. So finding those moments of wellness, because you need to create that joy and peace, because this work is hard and it's easy. And sometimes even myself, I want to get out and give up, right? And so like working out and going to the gym, that helps me. Maybe being in that team sport, going hiking, doing a Tough Mudder contest, with nature walks, things like that. And then a little small thing I got to say, even with my nieces, I love dance parties. That sounds like the smallest thing. And we have a little dance party. And when I'm dancing with a 5 and 2-year-old, I feel like life is okay and good in the midst of this work. So you got to really find those things that add movement in your life. And that can be however you work. I know a lot of us work remotely, some of us in the office, but maybe you can take that walk at lunch, have your headphones, whatever may be those small things. And then also that making gratitude a part of your routine. And he's kind of talked about this and talked about it sense of momentum. But I think even for yourself, you have to do those things, whether it be a gratitude journal, weekly reflections, monthly reflections. I'm a big reflective person. So like in March during my birthday, I had a whole whiteboard and wrote down all the things I was just grateful for. And it started with small things, just like I have the breath of life. I'm alive today. I have a roof over my head, my job. And then I think about all the experiences and the people I've met and all these things in the midst of this work, because sometimes it gets hard and you forget that. Also, I think in the midst of that joy and peace, being thankful for what I've actually accomplished in the midst of that, and giving myself on the pat on the back to say, wow, look at this. Keep going, Anthony, you got this. And then I'm a big believer in this. People who work with me professionally know that I really try to set and hold true to my own boundaries to keep that joy and peace. So I can keep going in this work, thinking about how do I take time off, whether it be I'm going to work summer Fridays. I'm not going to work summer Fridays. Or maybe unplugging completely and saying at 8 p.m., I'm turning off all my electronics, avoiding those necessary devices and overload. And then really asking yourself, I've done it before. I remember this myself, thinking about emails I received after work. Think about, ask yourself, is it urgent? Is it really that urgent? Can I wait till tomorrow to handle this, or till Monday if it's a Friday? And then communicating that truth with people. I think it's so important in the midst of this work to really communicate that truth and be honest, and don't feel guilty about taking time off or making sure you have, time to go walk during your lunch instead of sitting at your desk. Don't feel guilty about that. You're working so that you can truly be filled and pour out, because you can't really pour out to other people if you weren't pouring into yourself. And that's how you really create joy and peace for yourself in the midst of this. But let me also talk to, because I know there are a lot of leaders here in this room. You manage a team, you are maybe a CEO at a company. So I also think in the midst of this work, you have to lead by example. Okay, myself, example, I've learned this in the past few years ago. Some direct reports said, Anthony, you always tell us take 8 days off and time off. But when you're traveling to this place and this place, you're emailing us late at night. And I always said, well, it's easy for me to work from a hotel and get things done. But it made them, they were influenced by that, and it made them go, wow, I need to watch. It made me think to myself, I need to watch how much I'm working, because my team sees me working hard and hard and hard and not taking that time to rest. So they feel like in order to get promoted, or order to be like me, in order to have more opportunities, they have to really do what I'm doing, right? And I also think leading by example means in the midst of the equity work, whatever role you have as a manager, as a supervisor, as a leader in your organization, you also being a part of that work and you joining those sessions or being a part of that celebration that the team is having, all those tough discussions they're having about how to continue their work, making sure the team sees you there because they know you're in it with them in the midst of this. And then one thing I have to give credit in my fellowship program with the New Sector Alliance, we constantly have talked about since our first session, challenging the norm. That means you got to disrupt the mantle a little bit. Dr. Fisher talked about that within your organization. So that can be re-examine HR benefits. Is everyone having an equal access to whether it be time off, promotions, mental health resources, all these different benefits? Is every group really being supported and have everything they need there? And also thinking about team structures. How are people promoted? How are teams organized? Is every team really fair in terms of the flow and the workflow and the things that people are doing? And also being transparent about that in terms of promotions, in terms of diversity, and by gender, by race, by all these different groups to really make sure we really allow everyone to have a voice and move up. And also, this is a big thing for me. We all know in this remote world, we get into meetings all the time. But how often are people meeting? Are you at an organization? Are you doing so much? Or even as a leader, everyone's meeting all the time. They can't get work done or they feel depleted. Think about that and talk to people. Get insight from them, feedback, and think about how can we structure so maybe it's no meeting Fridays or meeting first half of the Mondays. There's no meeting so people actually can get their work done. Or have a PD day. We do that in my organization now. I've been able to spearhead this. We have a whole own your learning day when it's actually 4 hours of PD, us to dive into some work, really challenge ourselves, grow, but in innovation. And it really allows us time to really be innovative and continue this work. And then check on your team as a leader. Okay, really making sure, I think one-on-one check-ins are so important, but it's not just about the tasks. How are they doing as individuals in the midst of this work? Do they see the progress? What are they excited for? And it's how are they doing for their wellness? Talk about that. As a supervisor, we've got to talk to people as human beings so we can really have that strong sense of rapport and collaboration, and then make sure they have a voice. They have a chance to elevate, they can express different things so they feel like they can be challenged and grow, and give them also still a sense of autonomy. So you're not micromanaging support, making sure everyone has balanced workloads. And all of this is to create a sense of belonging. When people feel like they're really on your team, you're in it with them, you really care about their joy and peace as a human being in the midst of this hard work and this open communication, people jump right in with you to continue to do that work. And as a leader, that's our job, to bring people along with us, because we as leaders can't do it alone. No CEO can change the world on his own. He has a team of people, or her or they have a team of people with them, truly helping them. So really make sure you think about that in terms, as a manager, how can you change your culture in your organization to really lift up other people so they have joy and peace in the midst of this work.
Thank you, Anthony. You said so much good stuff, and I'm going to invite Dr. Heiser on, who will lead our Q&A with us. But one of the key things you said that I thought was very interesting is this process of, what I think the summary of it is, that it's important to anchor ourselves in joy and peace in all these different ways because the work is challenging. The reason why we put this as an anchor in developing capacity is because we're trying to reclaim the narrative that's been created about doing equity and justice work. The narrative that it's hard, it's terrible, that you're going to be tired and there's no joy in this and there's no peace in this. Like, we want to reclaim that, because we want to boil it down to something as simple as, if you want your family members to be having their humanity honored, if you want people to respect and care and see and hear you, then everyone deserves that. And in order for us to stay in this work, it's important for you to anchor in the joy and peace as well as the other items. So that joy and peace piece that Anthony talked about is so critical, because you're going to need those things to hold yourself steady when you're winning and excited, when there's resistance, and also when you might be feeling like you're trying to keep people's momentum and stamina up. You can employ any of those strategies to keep those things going. So we're going to turn it over to Q&A with Dr. Heiser. She has some questions teed up. Before we get started, I want to make sure I answer Kay Bell's question. Actually, let me just quickly go ahead and answer, because he put in the chat box. He said, how do you identify loyalties in a non-threatening way? When I brought up the idea of loyalties, here's one easy way you can do that, Kay Bell. because you want to get behind who they're loyal to, because they're not going to say, yeah, here's my loyalties, Kivel. So one thing you want to do is to ask them, which people are feeling this way about our equity training program? So the situation scenario, someone's coming up to you saying, we shouldn't be doing this equity work. People are upset, they're frustrated. Kivel would say, which people are upset? Tell me more about that.
Mhm.
Would you be open to serving as a bridge for me so that we can talk to them and address their needs? But which people? And that's how you get your names there, and not a judgmental way, but that's how you know kind of where the kind of side chatter is in the back. And some people may say, well, I don't feel comfortable sharing people's names. Okay, you don't have to share their names, but it's hard for me to address their issues if you don't let me know who they are, because we can't personally fix what it is that they're trying to, get their needs met with. Okay. Come on, Dr. Heiser, let's go. Anthony and I are ready.
Let's do it. All right, so we're going to start with Anthony. Where do you start when you're leading for equity? So if you're like in a new role, or when you just are feeling like you don't have as much power in the organization, you do a lot of culture building in your organization that you spoke to earlier. So we want to start with you with this question.
Yes, and I have experience with this because I've been in this cultural role for about 2 years now. And I think the first things to start, making sure you have a connection with your CEO or someone in the senior leadership team. I'm lucky I get to meet my CEO once a month. My entire ERG team, we meet and I lead those meetings with him to really have honest conversations about what's happening. And we've been able to gather data around that too and share that. I think also making sure HR is somehow connected with that too, because sometimes HR and CEOs, making sure that's kind of worked out. Every organization is different. So making sure you have time with your HR director, but then also giving a voice to the people in the organization. Since I've been doing this equity work at my organization at Nifty, we have collected a lot of feedback, but actually that's helped guide our action steps and then reporting back. So to talking to the CEO about that data, the HR director, and then actually providing updates, as Dr. Fisher talked about, we've had some momentum wins when we started Affinity Group. And I see Sarah here from CCEJ who helped us lead that work here. And we got to celebrate that win and kind of share that with everyone on LinkedIn and our staff. So making sure you have an ear with your CEO or somebody on the senior leadership team, and then also making sure that you HR director and then giving your the rest of the organization a voice to kind of express how they're feeling about things. So we're not assuming.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Fisher, do you have anything to add?
I do not. I just put it on the chat box, drop your questions in the chat, and then we'll just keep going with the ones that you have from the webinar sign up.
All right, we'll switch to you, Dr. Fisher. How do you stand in your truth when leading others who push back?
Ooh, that is so interesting. And I love resistance. I love talking about resistance. I know I'm a strange duck when I say this. But I do that because, at the heart of it, I do think most people, there's about like 0.9% of people that don't wake up like this, that are like car-toting racists, but I'm talking about most people we work with, they wake up and they're trying to do their best in the morning, but they have learned a lot of socializations that has told them who's worthy, who's valuable, who's inferior, who's superior, right? So I start off with that basis of like, most people are waking up not seeking to harm or do wrong in the world that I'm working with, but they might have some shadow sides. And that's why we have a core value called love at Developing Capacity, because we love people enough to be honest with you, and we love you enough to help you heal from your shadow sides. And so when people are pushing back, the first question I love to ask, and this time my advisor, Deborah Jewel Sherman, can you help me to understand? Those 4 words are golden, because what it does is it allows the person to pause and replay back. So can you help me to understand what your challenge is? It allows them to repeat what they're saying. It slows you down from being reactive and allows you to actually listen to the person. And then after I hear what they're saying, then I'm able to address piece by piece. My goal isn't to convince someone at the end of a conversation to love equity and justice, because I know what most people resist change, right? Most people enjoy their comfort of life and the status quo. So my goal is not to convert you in the moment. My goal is to plant a seed to help you to understand why we are anchoring in these core values, to help you to understand why it's important for us to honor everybody's humanity, why it's important for us to embark on this journey. And my goal is also to let you know that you've been heard, to really listen to what you're saying, to say, can you help me to understand? And to say to people, you know, I'm not going to promise to give you the answer to all of your questions now, because you probably have some things that you're saying that I need to go back and reflect on and to think about. But what is unequivocal, unshakable is my commitment to equity and justice. What is unequivocal and unshakable is my commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I don't have to separate that out just because somebody's pushing back. But giving people an open ear to let them know that they're being heard is the first step. And to be honest, say, well, what do you feel when sometimes when people are pushing back or resisting, there's some people don't want to do this. I feel like I'm being forced to go through this training. It's not right. You know, you can say, well, what do you feel about this isn't right? Really kind of engage people on the back and forth and listening and really trying to get at what do they feel like they're losing? What are their challenges? And to let them know that this is not going to be tied in a bow. Part of this work is going to make you uncomfortable. Right? That's the nature of this work, but it's in service of honoring our collective humanity at this organization. It's in service to making sure that everybody feels heard, seen, and respected. And to do that, we have to have an abundance mentality, a mentality that says there exists a world where we all can benefit and thrive. And I realize I'm asking you to take on a huge task by like thinking that way now, but that's what we're working towards.
All right, we're going to have one last question before we switch to the wrap up here. So I'm going back to you, Anthony. How do you foster accountability for an organization that says one thing but does another?
Yeah, great question. I think, first of all, centering back to what Dr. Fisher said earlier, centering back to the core values. If we said as an organization, these are our core values and equity is a part of that, and gender equality or whatever that core value may be, depending on your organization you work for, bringing it back to that, I think that would help hold people accountable. And then saying, hey, we've said A, B, and C here, but people are saying B, C, D, E. So also having data, you have to have, if we talk about data informed, but data has to come from the people. They have to have a voice. You have to elevate your team. So people are saying this, even though that's our equity statement, then we got some work to do. And as we see that, and we have to constantly, as you said it, Dr. Fisher, you said it earlier, this work is accountability, but consistent. Those check-ins, they can't be once a year when you get that feedback. It needs to be twice a year, maybe 4 times a quarter. Maybe it's in different ways, focus groups, something like that. So constantly think of various ways so people constantly hear their voice being heard, and reminding people that this work is a continuous journey and that we're not going to solve everything overnight. And being upfront, but then also saying, but we need to make some more progress here. So I think you got to push people, but then see where you can push. And every organization is different there, but really thinking through that is important.
Well, I think to balance that with something I heard earlier, it's that balance of like, this isn't going to happen overnight, but let's celebrate the wins along the way so that we remind ourselves why we're here and the progress that we're making. And I just have to show you a lot of love, Anthony, because you're throwing a lot of shout outs there for the data, and data drives so much of what we do. We love to like pair data with the lived experience to help make informed decisions. And so I'm just going to take a quick plug here. Speaking of data, we just posted, Dr. Fisher just posted in the chat. Please give us your feedback. This is mostly just a handful of questions if you want to kind of be on our roster and in communication with us, or just your thoughts and general feedback on the webinar itself. But back to you two, Dr. Fisher and Anthony.
Yeah, I just want to just wrap us up here to say part of, and this kind of answers Ryan's question a little bit, but not directly. So part of why we started offering these sessions on leading for anti-racism and equity is because we realize that some people may never meet developing capacity because they might live in a state like Texas or Florida that's banning this work, but they have a desire to build their capacity. So these webinars are free. They normally cost a lot of coins for people who do this work with us, but we are doing this because we believe in this current time, we have to build the capacity of everybody around us, whether or not they become a part of a DCC program or not. So this is our micro resistance, or not really micro, because a lot of work goes into these. So this is our macro resistance to addressing the fact that DEI is under attack, as we're bold in our stance as developing capacity to say that we're not just about money and capitalism and that you need to always pay us to get some knowledge about how to lead. These webinars are our way of making this democratized to anybody who wants to come and learn. It's free for you to come and learn from us for these 45 minutes. We are also in the process of launching an initiative to address what's happening in southern states. So stay tuned and keep following us. In the next couple of months, we will be sharing what we'll be doing for folks in those states to support people who might be banned from doing equity and justice work. The last thing I'll say here is that we have and when we talk about conscious leadership for equity, we always say, like, be true to what you say on paper. And that's from Martin Luther King Jr.'s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last speech. And he says, America, we just want you to be true to what you say on paper. And that's what Anthony was saying. And that's what we're trying to say. If you make these proclamations for equity and diversity, be true to what you're saying on paper. You know, we want you to be true to that. And be true means that you actually live it and do this work. We want to tee you up for our next two webinars that we would love for you to join us for. And they're going to be a part 1 and a part 2 in July and August. They're going to be a double header. July's webinar is going to be on the racial incident happens. Now what? So we're going to talk to you about, oh crap, this happened. What do we do? And then in August, we're going to talk to you about what's the pathway to healing after the racial incident has happened. So the immediate response and then the pathway to healing. The last thing we'll say here is that if you've enjoyed what we've talked about, we encourage you to consider our team capacity building series, which will allow you to take your team through 3 equity leadership sessions, have some assessments to manage your growth, get a blueprint that will guide you on your equity journey, and also LinkedIn badges for you and your team to just publicly display your work in this area. We'll share more about this in the post-session email that you all will get from us. But if you want to take us up on that, we'll give you all 10% off in the next 30 days. And we have to end with the wisdom of bell hooks. And we have to end with the wisdom of bell hooks. But before I do that, let me drop the handout in the chat box, folks. So give me a second. Let me drop the handout in the chat box for you.
And as you're doing that, I can read the quote.
Please
Well,
do.
and you see there, true resistance to inequity begins with people confronting pain. As we talk about being uncomfortable, being comfortable or being uncomfortable, whether it's yours or someone else's, and want to do something to change it. And I think that's what we're all in this. You've all joined this, and that's what this is about. In DCC, we constantly talk about that. We're in this work to confront that pain and really figure out, want to do something to change that so people really have the life they all deserve. And we all deserve that no matter what we believe, who we are, who we love, what we look like. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Dr. Fisher, I thank you for letting me be this webinar and talk a little bit about how our culture relates to all this and wellness. And thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us and bringing your wisdom. Thank you, Dr. Heiser, for putting together this wonderful handout in the background and continuing to show us the importance of using these micro moments like the handout to collect data and to move more from a data-informed perspective. And thank you all for joining us. We hope that you have a great day, and you'll get an email from us by the end of the week with a video of this webinar, the handout, and some other goodies. Take care.